as she mentioned, I am a storytelling coach and I am your speaker for today. And I am going to start up top with a confession, which is that when Jennifer initially reached out for this, I think it was February or something, I thought she wanted me to come and do a storytelling workshop because some of you have actually attended those workshops, and that's kind of what I've been known for more recently. And then we met last month and she's like, no, I want you to tell your story because Creative Mornings is a space where you come, you tell your story, and you inspire people around entrepreneurship. And I was like, are you sure you have the right person? Okay, I'll be inspirational for people. And I figured I'd start with by, just using the same 2 slides I do in all my workshops to give a little brief sense of how I got into storytelling. And then I was like, I'm sure I could just tell that story slowly and make it go for 20 minutes, right? And that really was where my head was at. Up until about a week ago, I was speaking at the Tucson Metro Chamber. I was on a panel there, and I had an idea, and I was like, that's what I'm supposed to be talking about today. But you're not going to find out now what I'm talking about. You have to wait for it. So I'm going to really quickly go through the first 2 slides in a rapid fire way. Some of you have heard this, but typically I start off my workshops by saying a sort of 3-act play of how I got into this, which is I used to work for the city of Phoenix in economic development. I did not come from a family of poets and storytellers and creatives. I came from bureaucrats. And that was my life, except for the fact that it was totally soul crushing. Our department did like tax breaks for gajillionaires that never needed it in the first place. And it was just a place where I was super censored and I just was dying inside. And I found out about this thing called storytelling because some of my friends were doing it. And after about a year of going to different shows, I got the nerve to get on stage myself, quickly got totally hooked into it, obsessed, got on stages. And then about a year later, I had an existential crisis and turned it into a business, and then released Phoenix, my apartment, put all my stuff in storage, and went on a cross-country road trip where a friend said, if you're going to be an entrepreneur, you should come to San Francisco because there's so many entrepreneurs here and they all need to know how to tell their story. And I was like, cool, do you have a couch I can crash on? Because I just quit my job, so I actually can't afford anything. And she said yes. She hooked me up with a couch and she hooked me up with a speaking gig. And this is the first time that I ever stepped foot in front of anybody and said, hi, my name is Darian. I'm a storytelling coach. And it was well attended. And the unfortunate thing about this is that I asked the presenter or the host, sort of who's going to be in the audience? What's the vibe here? And she's like, well, it's San Francisco. So lots of tech, lots of dudes, like kind of an engineering environment. And I wish I could say that that didn't unnerve me, but it did. And I created this talk called The Science of Storytelling to pander to the crowd. And I basically went on a mission of memorizing as many talking points from neuroscientists and other people with PhDs to look credible for this audience of Stanford grads and all these. And needless to say, it was okay at best. Some people said it was actually pretty good, but what was alarming to me was the way in which I completely lost my shit in the middle of this thing. I started to sweat, I had to take my jacket off, got cotton mouth, the whole 9 yards, vision blurred. And when I asked the host, can you give me some feedback? I felt like that was a little off, but I don't know for sure. She said a lot of things, but the thing that stood out to me was that she said, I found myself wanting more storytelling. And I've come to understand that in a few different ways. One, storytelling is a craft, right? You're speaking about something chronologically, as I'm doing right now. But also what I had done, which was even more jarring for me, is that I had completely abandoned my own lived experience as being good enough for me taking up the space. I was invited to speak, and I was like, no. I need to step into what I think they want me to do right now. And so that has been the foundation for all of the coaching that I do, all the workshops. In one way or another, it all comes back to this idea of, can we actually believe that what we've seen, witnessed, tasted, smelled, whatever in our lives, is that good enough to make us credible to speak? Thank you for the snap. It is not too early for the snap. And so that being said, here I am 5 years later, and Jen invites me, and I do it again, where I was like, when she said, come tell your entrepreneurial story to inspire people on a Monday morning or Friday morning, I go, okay, well, what made me think my story wasn't potentially good enough was I felt that I needed to reach a certain level of income in order for my story to be valid, right? I feel like most stories have this, everything was terrible, but then I did this, and then I hit the jackpot. And spoiler alert, not has that happened to me. But, and so in this panel that I talked about, the Tucson Metro Chamber, the panel was called How to Tell a Fundable Story. And I was there with angel investors and other lenders and things like that. And we were giving so much great advice, so much advice. And we were in some ways talking about money. And it hit me at the end, I was like, we're talking about money, but we're not really talking about money. And not in the way I've experienced entrepreneurship and money, like real talk. So that's what I'm going to be talking about right now. So we're going to rewind the clock a little bit and go through just a little bit more of my story. As I mentioned, I became Phoenix famous as a storyteller. I got to perform on many stages. I was invited, all the things, all the smiles. I even got to do a little bit on the road. This is in Berkeley. One of my favorite moments is I got to perform in the Moth in New York, and I won. I came in first place. Thank you. And then I got to come back for the Grand Slam where I came in dead last. But I mentioned I had an existential crisis, and I'm not going to harp on this because this has been talked about way too much. But the existential crisis I'm talking about was November 2016, and this moment made me really question, what am I actually doing with my life? Like, am I really just a girl running around like, hey, look at me? And so the same month, in November 2016, I was invited to participate in a workshop in South Phoenix at the time that there was a light rail getting ready to go through the neighborhood, and this community started to learn about storytelling from the vantage point of a right to remain as an act of resistance. And I was like, that is really what this is all about. And so I talked to the organizer. Her name is Liz Warren. She's in blonde. She's not the Liz Warren. And I was like, what was that? Like, how can I do that the rest of my life? And she tells me, well, I guess you have been called to be a storyteller. And I was like, yeah, I know. What does that mean? And she said, no, I mean, there are people who tell stories, and then there are people who understand their responsibility to their community. And that's a storyteller. And I was like, oh, yes. So I come up with this sort of year-long plan for 2017 where I don't know how, I don't know where, I don't know how this is all going to work, but by the end of the year, I was going to be a full-time storyteller. I didn't know if this was a business. I was going to switch jobs. I don't know what it was. And then March 7th, 2017 comes along, and I'm in my annual performance review with my supervisor. And she can tell I'm having a little bit of a moment. And she goes, do you even want to work here? And I kind of dodged the question because I was like, I have a 1-year plan, okay? And she asked it again. And by the third time, I finally just look inside and I go, no? What are we going to do about that? And so we put together this plan where I phased out. And this is me on May 1st, International Workers' Day. I thought it was a really cute day to quit. And it was my last day. And I had since created, I got the domain Storyboss Nation, which makes me sound like a cult leader, but anyway, that was the business that felt right at the time. And I created a hashtag because that was the thing. And I started to do what I thought all entrepreneurs should be doing, which is post on social media nonstop about your business. So I started to go to startup events, hashtag all the things. I had my own hashtag going. I don't know if anybody knows that shirt, but that is the We Work slogan. And I unfortunately threw away the shirt right before the documentary, but yeah, so I was boss life all the way. I created my own tagline. I got a branded photo shoot. I got branded t-shirts. And as I mentioned, I went on this cross-country road trip, which meant my car needed to get branded as well. And so I announced on social media, I tagged all my friends across the country, I'm coming through, save the date, would also save me a couch. Somebody told me that my memoir should be called, Can I Crash on Your Couch? So I rolled through and I did this through all of the summer of 2017, and that's its own story. But as any good digital nomad / lifestyle entrepreneur must do, you have to document everything. And I did that. California, all the books, Read an Alchemist, Kansas, There's No Place Like Home, and my personal favorite, I Ain't the Hoe, You the Hoe. As well as I took a trip back to Oregon where I used to live. We got to pause on this. Jersey Shore, messing with Texas, all the things. And do you really have an Instagram if you don't have inspirational quotes? I had my own here. Only you have to live your life, make your decisions accordingly. Storyboss Nation. And Jim Carrey made the cut. And content, because content is queen, right? And so I had Storyboss tips. I had to take a picture of a bunch of books that I maybe haven't actually finished, but you have to tell people how brilliant you are, right? And then ultimately made the decision to actually move to San Francisco. It felt like one of these things like, I'll always regret it if I don't at least try. So I go there, got the Golden Gate Bridge, and it's all looking like I am just living the dream. Like literally my newsletters at this point used to end, with love, Anna, storytelling coach and live your dream enthusiast. I wish I were kidding. Like this is not actually a joke. This isn't like a comedy bit. Like this is all actual truth. And you have to go to all the tech headquarters because otherwise nobody really believes that you're there. Now, I'm being sort of flippant about all this, and this is the picture we've already seen, but I was actually doing a lot of actual storytelling work. You know, this was my first time speaking, and I offered up to everybody there, I'm learning how to coach, you know, I'll work for free, I don't care, and Lord, did I do a lot of free work. And that's where the story is going to turn. So I spoke, and people looked happy, and they took advantage of my free work, and then they invited me to speak some more, and then I did some more workshops, and everybody loved what I was doing, and this all looked amazing. People were like, girl, you on fire, like you are killing it, because all this stuff looks good, right? You know, like these pictures from today are gonna look really good. And
But they paid you.
spoiler, you know, love, nobody's getting paid here, so it's all good. But like, you know, and so I started to get this sort of like cognitive dissonance where I was on one hand the most public I'd ever been with these things that looked like I was crushing it. But then behind the scenes, I was like, but let's talk about my bank account here. And this is where the story started to really become real for me, because there was so much entrepreneurial advice that I was hearing at this point, right? And I think of the advice, you know, almost all of it is about money in some way, right? Really around revenue goals is really most of the advice. And I put the advice that I got into two big camps, which was what I would say more masculine energy advice, which was like, work all day, you don't need a life, just crush it. Jump and the net will appear, like bet on yourself. I don't know, I'm missing, you guys can fill in the blanks. Like all these, just like crush it, work 8 days a week. And just, you know, if you take the most wild risks today, I promise it's gonna pay off at the end of the tunnel. And then there was the more feminine energy, which was like, the universe is abundant. If you just put together a vision board, put $1 trillion on it, just wait. You're laughing because you've done it. And I did all of it. I put together I had journals upon journals with all my hopes and dreams and goals and revenue things and all that, and I had the vision boards. And I just kept waiting for this moment where it would all turn into $1 million. And nobody was telling me things like, entrepreneurship actually brings you face to face with the deepest core of your worthiness. And unfortunately, in our society, that gets tied to money. And I could do literally anything for free. And if it came to a time where they're like, okay, well, like what's your pitch? What's the thing? Literally the words couldn't leave my mouth. I couldn't charge for what I was doing. Or I shouldn't say that. I charged some amounts here and there. I might do $50 here, 75 or whatever. I think a couple like 4-figure deals like snuck in and I was like, oh my God, I'm rich. And so you might be asking yourself a question that a lot of other people I found out were asking themselves, which is like, okay, well then how am I living, right? Because I live in San Francisco, right? Which is not a place you ever want to launch a business, spoiler. And I was bankrolling the whole thing on debt. My investors were Capital One and American Express, okay? And once I started to be honest with myself about that, then I started to ask other people, like, how are you doing it? Because I lived in this place that was all hopes and dreams and visionaries and all these things, and everybody was launching a startup that was pre-revenue and living with like $3,000 rent. So I was like, how are you doing it? And so those people who were honest with me, leaving aside the folks that were being supported by, you know, husbands or trust funds or things like that, they were also like just up to their eyeballs in debt, making their dreams come true. And I was like, why aren't we talking about this? And I'm a storyteller, so I decided I was gonna talk about it. And so I posted a video that was a deviation from my story tips, and it was called, I'm getting real about money, fear, shame, and boss life, maybe too real. And I told them effectively what I'm telling you right now, just like for anybody who is watching this and being inspired, because a lot of people were telling me, they're like, oh my God, like you're living my dream, like how do you do it? They were asking me for advice, and I'm like, you know, and I'm not gonna say that I did everything terrible, right? Like there's a lot of people that have ideas and never take any action, right? For free or not. But it was truly like I was I couldn't keep living in a way where I was so public in one way and growing deeper and deeper into isolation in my real life, because that's what shame does, is it pulls you into silence and you can barely like sit with yourself, let alone tell other people what's happening. And so this was my first foray into actually telling my story, and it got a lot of traction. People commented, sent me private messages. For lack of better words, there was a lot of like me too kind of, yes, yes, yes. And so I wish I could tell you that at this point I was like, all right, this whole entrepreneurship thing, it's a racket. I'm going to quit. I'm going to get a 9-to-5. I'm going to, leave San Francisco. But I did not. I started a podcast, which I don't regret. It was called Money Speaks. I thought I deleted it a few years ago because I maybe overshared a little too much. But I found out recently it's still living on Spotify because somebody's like, oh, I've been listening to Money Speaks. I'm like, how? But I'm actually happy. And so if anybody's curious, I would recommend episode 1 and 2, where I went really deep into my own money story. Like really, like how did I learn about it? Who taught me about this thing? Everything from my wonderful but sweet Catholic mother that would think like, Jesus didn't charge, why should you? Or my father who grew up in communist Soviet Union and was like, what's money? Like, so, the empire should take care of you. And so all of these things just meant that when I would sit in front of a human being and tell them this is my price, I literally couldn't do it. And working in government, you get to avoid having these negotiations, right? Because it's all these sort of safe brackets. And so lots of other people came on the podcast. There was a lot of healing that came from it. All beautiful things. A lot of people said, like, I never had thought about my money story, and thank you for this work. But then I had to kind of call bullshit on myself because I was continuing to debt this whole time. I just suddenly became like a money expert somehow. And there was this breaking point where somebody literally asked me for advice on how to negotiate their salary. And I was like, oh, this has gone too far. And so I was like, maybe we don't need to go this route. And so I at least got enough sanity in me to move back to Arizona. So I came back here at the end of 2018. Got a part-time job, didn't quite have the nerve to get a full-time job because at this point, the level of insanity I was at is I felt that if I got a 9-to-5, I somehow would be telling other people that this dream isn't possible for them, because I really felt that I had become this inspiration for like, fuck the 9-to-5 and go live your dream and turn your passion into your purpose, into your business and all these things that I would hear. And I was like, if I don't keep pushing on this, then I'm letting other people's dreams down, which is insane. So I got connected to the startup community here. Excuse me, one more time. Do you remember the space Connect? I think that might be even Becky in white. So I got plugged in, no shame to anything I was doing, but I continued to push ahead, but in Tucson. And it wasn't until April 15th, 2019, I know this was April 15th because it's tax day, and there's nothing that makes you take a real hard look at how your life is going right now like tax day. Because it's nice to have dreams for the future, but sometimes you just gotta look at the now, right? And so on April 15th, 2019, I took myself into a room, and I don't typically talk about this part of the journey, but I couldn't not talk about it today. But there's a group called Debtors Anonymous where you basically crawl in there like an alcoholic on a bender, except your bender is like 3 maxed out credit cards. And I told my story to a group of sweet strangers. And I cut up all my credit cards that night and started this journey. And so this is not going to become a whole evangelical speech about Debtors Anonymous, but one thing I do want to point out is this idea of living one day at a time that I think became very important for me because I had started to live in the hope of a promised tomorrow, and that became insane for me. And so I continued to go to these meetings, continued to kind of like get more and more honest with other people about the reality of this, and then ultimately did make the move to getting a full-time 9-to-5 summer 2019 with this goal of I'm going to work there for 2 years, I'm going to shake off my old demons about 9-to-5 work, and I'm going to get debt-free. And I basically went completely dark on social media with any talk of business, storytelling, all the things. I think most people in Tucson didn't even know I had a business. I think most people think I just launched this last year, which is totally fine. And then, but I also, what the pandemic started to give me in 2020 was this opportunity to actually learn things like, what is a business model? How do you package your things? Like, what's your niche? What's your customer? What's your this? And so I took a business development course, and I just slowly and silently, I didn't blast it all over social media, just started to get some foundations going, to where in 2021, I had my first story tip in about a year and a half, and it was called The 5 Mindset Shifts to Going Back to a 9-to-5. And really what I talk about in this video is what I really feel is a toxic binary around entrepreneurship versus 9-to-5 as being totally different. And this is like the 9-to-5 is nonsense, entrepreneurship is this dream, and all these things that just didn't come true for me. And I felt that it was keeping probably a lot of other people throwing one more Hail Mary to try to make this thing work. There's a sports reference for the guys in the room. They're all in the back, just like, don't call me. And this got a lot of traction as well. People commented, thank you for your vulnerability, which I've come to know that if somebody says thank you for your vulnerability in a comment, that means me too. But that's okay. I appreciate it. So with that, we're still deep in the pandemic, and I had sensed that there was this idea of the Great Resignation was coming. And so I started to, this is where somebody might have seen it. I started to do a lot of job interview coaching and workshops. It's not like the core of what I do now, but for the purposes of 2021, it was just so key for me to step out and actually, I hate to say it, gain some self-esteem back around actually charging money and having a website, and you can book now and this and this and that. And it helped me to get back in motion. And at the beginning of 2022, I didn't want to take chances with videos. So this was actually a little meme I did, but I paid off all my debt. I was 100% debt free. This is actually a video I recorded on New Year's going into 2020, and I was like punching like the old decade away, but we didn't know 2020 was coming yet. So, but I do want to point out this guy, because let's just take it back a notch. So we see him come in. I didn't see it the first time, and then he's like just walking, whatever. And this is where he's like, what is happening? I just love it. I could watch that all day. But and I'm not telling a story that's like a rags to riches, like I was in debt and now I'm not. That's not the point. It's never been about the money. It's never been about the debt. It's been a complete other journey of just what does it look like to be sober and sane in the now. And so you got to see my picture as part of this thing. And so there's so many things I could say at this moment. And I'm not telling you, I don't know if I'm even trying to be inspirational with my story. This is what felt like it needed to be said. And that's why I'm doing this. But also I'm telling my story because I know that it's not unique, it's not rare, it's way more common than the actual stories that we hear, except what we hear is something of like 95% of startups fail and blah, 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 but we don't know like what was all of that behind the scenes, and I feel called to bring some truth to that. And if I had another takeaway, is just the truth will set you free. For me in my journey, everything started from a place of actually telling the truth first to myself and then to others. And from that place, you can make different decisions. And so I have continued to work on my business. My business now is more focused on entrepreneurship and things like that. And I'm not giving a pitch for all that today. But I am going to be phasing out of a job that I have now, a 9-to-5 or it's part-time 9-to-5 that I'm doing now. And I'm, it's a scary thing. Somebody said, oh, that's so exciting. And I was like, wait for my story. And it is exciting. And I don't want to take away from dreams and ambitions and all those things. That's not the point of this thing. All I'm saying is, can we actually be honest with how things are going now and not make decisions today in the hope for some bananas future? Because also if we hear those stories, a lot of people say like, I reached my goals and I was miserable. So like, can we just be in the now with how things are actually going and be honest? So that's my story.